You think you know where your favorite foods came from? You crack open a cold 7 Up on a hot summer afternoon and never stop to wonder how that lemon lime fizz ended up in your hand. You bite into a crispy, golden piece of toasted ravioli at a Friday night dinner and assume it is just something Italian restaurants do. You slice into a gooey butter cake at a Sunday morning brunch and take for granted that someone, somewhere, figured out that doubling the butter in a recipe was the best mistake they ever made. What if I told you that all 3 of those things, and 7 more just as surprising, trace their origins to a single city sitting at the edge of the Mississippi River? A city that most food historians chronically underestimate. A city that has been quietly feeding the entire country and frankly the entire world for well over a century. Today we are counting down the 10 foods invented in St. Louis, and by the time we reach number 1, you will never look at your grocery cart, your restaurant menu, or your kitchen cabinet the same way again. Stay until the very end, because the number 1 pick is something sitting in millions of American kitchens right now, and almost nobody knows the gateway city deserves the credit. Number 10, the St. Paul sandwich, the most local secret on this entire list. There are foods that conquer the world and foods that plant their roots so deep in one place that they become inseparable from the neighborhood that created them. The St. Paul sandwich is the second kind. You almost certainly cannot find it outside of St. Louis. You definitely cannot find it on the menu of any national chain. And that is exactly what makes it extraordinary. The story begins in the 1940s on Chouteau Avenue in South St. Louis, where Stephen Ewan ran a small Chinese-American restaurant called Park Chop Suey. Ewan was working with the tastes and the wallet of his local customer base, predominantly working-class St. Louisans who wanted something filling, affordable, and satisfying without ceremony. His solution was deceptively simple. Take an egg foo young patty, that savory pan-fried disc of egg, beaten with vegetables and sometimes shrimp or pork, and instead of serving it with rice and gravy the traditional way, slide it between 2 slices of plain white bread with mayonnaise, lettuce, tomato, and pickles. The result was something that defied easy categorization. It was Chinese, it was American, it was a sandwich. And it was not a sandwich in any conventional sense. It was, most importantly, delicious. The St. Paul spread from one Chinese-American restaurant to another across the city. Today, you will find it not in upscale bistros or trendy gastropubs, but in the same kind of small, family-owned chop suey houses where it was born 80 years ago. It has never attempted to go national. It has never needed to. Some foods earn their greatness by conquering new territory. The St. Paul sandwich earned its greatness by staying exactly where it belongs. Number 9, gooey butter cake, the greatest mistake in St. Louis baking history. There is a school of thought that says the best recipes are the ones written intentionally, tested obsessively, and perfected through discipline and expertise. And then there is gooey butter cake, which was born because a St. Louis baker in the 1930s made a catastrophic error and accidentally invented one of the most beloved desserts in the American Midwest. The story, repeated in bakeries and diners across St. Louis for nearly a century, goes like this. A baker preparing a standard coffee cake dramatically miscalculated his proportions, inverting the ratio of butter to flour and producing something that should have been a disaster. The result came out of the oven flat, dense, barely risen, with a custard-like interior that refused to fully set, and a top that glistened with a stickiness that proper baking technique would never have produced. By any conventional standard, it was a failure. The baker served it anyway. His customers did not notice the failure, they noticed the flavor. Rich, buttery, eggy, with a slightly crisp sugar crust on the outside and a center that yielded to the fork like a dream. Dusted with powdered sugar and cut into squares, this accidental creation became a fixture of St. Louis breakfast tables and Sunday brunches so thoroughly embedded in the city's food culture that it was eventually named Missouri's unofficial state dessert. You can find it at Park Avenue Coffee on South Grand, at the Missouri Baking Company on the Hill, at virtually every bakery and brunch spot worth visiting in the metropolitan area. The classic version is still the best. But St. Louis bakers, never content to leave an accident alone, have spent decades expanding it into cherry, chocolate chip, lemon, blueberry, and dozens of other variations, each one a tribute to that long-ago morning when someone's mistake turned into a city's treasure. Number 8. The Gerber Sandwich, the open-faced original from South St. Louis. If you did not grow up in St. Louis, you have probably never heard of the Gerber Sandwich. That is a shame, because it is one of the most satisfying combinations of ingredients ever assembled on a piece of bread, and its origin story is one of the most charming in American food history. The Gerber was not invented by a chef in a professional kitchen. It was invented by a neighbor. Dick Gerber lived next door to Ruma's Deli in South St. Louis. He was a regular presence in the kitchen, the kind of familiar neighborhood figure who wanders in and makes himself at home. And one day he put together what he wanted for lunch using what was available. Italian bread sliced in half and opened flat. Garlic butter spread generously across the surface. Thin slices of ham layered on top. Provel cheese, the distinctly St. Louis processed cheese blend that we will return to later on this list, melted over everything. A sprinkle of paprika for color and a hit of warm spice. Into the oven until the cheese melts and the bread crisps at the edges. It sounds simple because it is simple, but the combination works so completely. The garlic butter sinking into the bread while the provel goes gooey, and the paprika perfumes the whole thing, that Ruma's Deli added it to the official menu and trademarked the name. Today, Ruma's, which has locations around South St. Louis and the surrounding suburbs, remains the definitive source for the original. But the Gerber has spawned imitators all over the city who serve their own versions under different names. They are all paying tribute, whether they admit it or not, to Dick Gerber's appetite on an ordinary afternoon. Number 7. Provel cheese. The cheese the rest of the country does not understand, and St. Louis refuses to apologize for. Here is where things get divisive. Mention Provel cheese to a St. Louisan and you will get a passionate defense of a product they have grown up eating their entire lives. Mention it to a food writer from New York or Chicago and you are likely to get an eye roll and a lecture about processed cheese products. Both reactions are valid, and neither one is entirely fair. Provel is a proprietary processed cheese blend developed somewhere around the Italian neighborhood of the Hill in St. Louis in the 1940s or early 1950s. The exact origin is murky. What is not murky is the formula. Provel combines cheddar, Swiss, and provolone into a processed blend that melts at a dramatically lower temperature than any of its component cheeses, creating a smooth, almost fluid consistency when heated that pools across a pizza rather than stretching into strings the way mozzarella does. It has a mild, slightly smoky flavor that never overpowers whatever it is sitting on. For St. Louis-style pizza, which we will discuss separately, this characteristic is not a flaw, it is the whole point. The cheese is produced by the Cherney Company and has been a fixture of St. Louis kitchens for decades. You will find it on pizza, on the Gerber sandwich, on pasta, and on sandwiches across the city. The cheese is indisputably a St. Louis original, inseparable from the culinary identity of the city. And the fact that the rest of the country has not adopted it says more about regional food loyalty than it does about quality. Number 6. St. Louis-style pizza, the square beyond compare. You want to start an argument at a dinner table in the American Midwest? Bring up pizza. Chicago will tell you deep dish is the only pizza worth eating. New York will tell you the fold is sacred, and everything else is a compromise. And then there is St. Louis, quietly serving a pizza so different from both of those styles that people who encounter it for the first time genuinely cannot decide if they love it or are confused by it. St. Louis-style pizza is defined by 3 things. First, the crust, cracker thin, unleavened, no yeast, baked until it snaps rather than bends. Second, the cheese. Provel, that same mild, low-melt blend we just discussed, spread across the surface in a layer that flows when hot, rather than stretching into those dramatic cheese pulls that dominate pizza videos online. Third, the cut. Not the traditional triangular wedges, but a grid of small squares, sometimes called a tavern cut or a party cut, designed to be picked up and eaten with minimal ceremony. Emo's Pizza, founded in 1964 by Ed and Margie Emo in St. Louis, claims credit for codifying and popularizing this style. And with over 100 locations in the Midwest, they have more than earned that claim. Whether you encounter it at Emo's, at Alicia's, at Pie Pizzeria, or at any of dozens of independent spots around the metro area, St. Louis-style pizza is an experience that divides and delights in equal measure. The cracker crust either strikes you as the best base a pizza has ever had, or the driest thing you have encountered since eating crackers on a long flight. There is almost no middle ground. That kind of passionate reaction is the mark of something genuinely original. Number 5. Toasted ravioli, the happy accident from the Hill. In the tight-knit Italian neighborhood of the Hill on the southwest side of St. Louis, 2 restaurants claim credit for the creation of toasted ravioli, and the argument between them has been going on for decades. The story, regardless of which kitchen it happened in, is essentially the same. Sometime in the 1940s, a cook reached for a pot of boiling water to finish some ravioli and missed, dropping the pasta into a fryer full of hot oil instead. A more careful cook would have thrown it out and started over. This cook let it ride. What came out of that fryer was a golden brown, crispy shelled pasta pillow, crunchy on the outside and tender on the inside, with the filling steamed to perfect tenderness by the heat trapped beneath the breading. Dusted with Parmesan and served with marinara sauce for dipping, it was immediately recognizable as something better than what had been intended. The locals on the Hill embraced it without hesitation, and within years it had spread from neighborhood institution to citywide phenomenon. Today, toasted ravioli, or T-Ravs as St. Louisans call them, with the comfortable familiarity of long acquaintance, appears on menus across the city and the region. You will find them at Charlie Gitto's on the Hill, which serves what it calls the original version with house-made pomodoro sauce. You will find them at Mama's on the Hill, at Zia's, at Antonino's Taverna, whose version made it onto diners, drive-ins, and dives. St. Louis even officially celebrates Toasted Ravioli Day on April 1st by proclamation. For an accident, it turned out remarkably well planned. Number 4. The frozen custard concrete. The dessert that inspired Shake Shack. Frozen custard itself was not invented in St. Louis. The creamy, egg yolk-enriched frozen dessert that is denser and silkier than ordinary ice cream has a longer history that predates the Gateway City. But the concrete, that specific formulation of frozen custard, blended thick and loaded with mix-in toppings until it is so dense it can be served upside down without a single drop falling out, that belongs to St. Louis. Ted Drew's frozen custard, which has stood on South Grand Avenue and on historic Route 66 since the 1930s, is credited with developing the concrete as a signature menu item. The genius of the format is that the toppings are not piled on top of the custard. They are blended throughout, so every single bite contains the same ratio of custard to hazelnuts, or strawberries, or graham crackers, or whatever combination you chose. Ted Drew serves theirs in a paper cup, hands it to you inverted with the opening pointed at the ground, and lets the density of the product do the rest. Nothing moves. Nothing falls. You are holding a cup of something so thick it has briefly defied gravity, and it tastes extraordinary. Danny Meyer, the New York restaurateur and St. Louis native behind Gramercy Tavern and the Shake Shack empire, has said publicly that the concrete at Ted Drew's was the direct inspiration for the milkshake menu at Shake Shack. There are thousands of Shake Shack locations now around the world. Every milkshake served at every one of them carries a trace of Ted Drew's in its DNA. St. Louis invented the formula. The world drinks it. Number 3. The St. Louis Slinger. The midnight meal that refuses to apologize. There are foods designed for refined dining rooms and foods designed for the honest hours between midnight and 4 in the morning, when a person needs something that will absorb the evening and deliver enough calories to get through to sunrise. The St. Louis Slinger is entirely and defiantly the second kind. A proper slinger begins with hash browns, crisped on a flat griddle until they hold their shape. On top of the hash browns goes a hamburger patty or your choice of protein, sometimes eggs scrambled or fried to your preference. And then the defining element, a generous ladle of chili, thick and savory, poured over the entire construction. Shredded cheddar cheese melts into the chili from the heat below. Raw white onion goes on top for crunch and bite. The plate arrives looking like the aftermath of a collision between breakfast and dinner, held together by chili and optimism. Courtesy Diner on Hampton Avenue in St. Louis claims a significant role in the Slinger's invention and has been serving it for decades. The diner holds the distinction of being named the best hole-in-the-wall diner in Missouri, a title that perfectly captures the category. The Slinger has been compared to Hawaii's Loco Moco in its basic architecture, a protein and egg combination served over a starch and drowned in sauce, but the chili element and the specific St. Louis construction give it an identity entirely its own. Andrew Zimmern of Bizarre Foods included St. Louis snoots among his top 10 favorite barbecue preparations when visiting the city. The Slinger earned a similar recognition from everyone who has ever needed exactly what it delivers at exactly the hour it delivers it. Number 2. Iced tea. The drink that cooled down the entire country. The precise origin of iced tea is one of those food history debates that never fully resolves, with competing claims coming from different parts of the American South for the latter half of the 19th century. But the moment that iced tea became a nationwide phenomenon, the moment it went from regional curiosity to American institution, happened in St. Louis in the summer of 1904. Richard Bleckenden was a tea vendor at the Louisiana Purchase Exposition, the St. Louis World's Fair that drew millions of visitors from across the country and around the world. Bleckenden had been assigned to promote hot tea from India and Ceylon to fairgoers who were, unfortunately for him, suffering through a record-breaking heat wave. Nobody was interested in a steaming cup of anything. Bleckenden, facing the prospect of losing the entire fair season, improvised. He ran his hot tea through pipes packed with ice and served it cold. Fairgoers who would never have paused for a cup of hot tea in that heat stopped for the cold version. They loved it. The concept spread from that booth to concession stands around the fairgrounds, and from the fairgrounds to the consciousness of a generation of Americans who brought the idea home with them when the fair closed. Today, iced tea is consumed in staggering quantities across the United States. It sits in pitchers on restaurant tables from Maine to California. It fills enormous fountain cups at fast food drive-thrus. It fills grocery store shelves in bottles and cans and powder mixes, a single vendor's practical solution on a hot day in St. Louis in the summer of 1904 changed what Americans drink. That is the power of a good idea at the right moment. Number 1. 7-Up, the most famous invention St. Louis never gets credit for. Everything on this list belongs to St. Louis in some meaningful way. The sandwiches and the pizzas and the desserts are beloved within the city and the region, celebrated by those who know them. But number 1 is different. Number 1 is a product that has been consumed on every inhabited continent. A product that became the third best-selling soft drink in the world by the 1940s. A product that you can purchase at virtually any gas station, grocery store, vending machine, or restaurant in America right now. A product that almost nobody associates with the city that created it. 7-Up was invented by Charles Leiper Grigg, a Missouri-born beverage man who had spent years in St. Louis working in advertising and the soft drink business before founding his own company. Grigg had already created 2 other sodas, Whistle and Howdy, before he turned his attention to the lemon-lime category that would make his name. He tested 11 different formulas over the course of 2 years before settling on the one that satisfied him. He introduced it in October 1929 under the original name, Bib Label, Lithiated Lemon Lime Soda, a name that was accurate but commercially suicidal. The timing was also historically unfortunate. His debut came 2 weeks before the stock market crash that launched the Great Depression. A less stubborn man would have folded. Grigg was not that man. He started selling from the back streets, working the mom-and-pop stores, building loyalty one storefront at a time before moving to the hotels and country clubs. The name was eventually simplified to 7-Up. The lithium citrate that the original formula contained as a mood-lifting ingredient was removed in 1950. By the 1940s, the drink was already reaching a global audience that would have seemed unimaginable to Grigg in those early desperate years of pushing his soda to whoever would take a case. The reason Grigg chose the name 7-Up he took to his grave in 1940, and the mystery has generated theories ever since, from the atomic weight of lithium to the number of ingredients to a lucky number Grigg favored. None of them have ever been confirmed. What has been confirmed, documented, and beyond any serious dispute is that 7-Up was born in St. Louis, Missouri. Next time you pour it over ice and hear that carbonation hiss and smell that clean lemon-lime clarity, you are tasting the gateway city without knowing it. Now you know. And there you have it. 10 foods invented in St. Louis, from a late-night diner plate that soaks up the evening to a lemon-lime soft drink that circles the globe without ever saying where it came from. This city, built at the bend of the Mississippi, invented a pizza that nobody outside the Midwest fully understands, and an accident in a pasta kitchen that turned into a civic institution. It invented a frozen custard preparation so thick it defies gravity, and a cake whose origin story begins with a baker who could not measure butter correctly and ended with an entire region grateful for the error. It invented a sandwich in a neighbor's kitchen, a cheese that the rest of the country cannot agree on, a late-night feast built from chili and hash browns, and a cold drink served to overheated fairgoers on a sweltering summer afternoon that changed how the entire country thinks about tea. Not bad for a city that usually only gets credit for the arch. St. Louis deserves a permanent seat at the table of America's great food cities, and the evidence has been sitting right in front of all of us the entire time. If this opened your eyes to what the gateway city has given the world, leave a comment with your favorite St. Louis food and whether you have had the chance to try the real thing where it was born. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because more food history is coming that will change what you thought you knew about the food on your plate. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay hungry, and keep rising.